or we're going to be talking about the EU, the neighborhood, and beyond. We're going to be talking about the challenges that the EU is facing at the moment, Turkey's position within that narrative.
The EU has historically been an area, a family of nations. Europe has been a family of nations which we as a nation, as a culture, as a society have been targeting our development. Of course, this was an historic choice. This has not been linked to this or that decade. It went for quite a long time. And it's linked with our political aspirations, it's linked with the way we think, the way we live, it's linked with our culture. But for sure there are steps which we develop in this direction. You mentioned integration, economic integration without political integration. And I think those two go hand in hand with each other. What we did as a country this year was that we signed an association agreement which is furthering our trade and personal communication tracks into European Union. And this association agreement is a historic agreement for us, and it's a new step that we take in becoming closer to the natural habitat of Georgia and the European Union. I think that in this context we'll be bringing quite an interesting possibilities, not only for the country, but for the entire development of region, of the Caucasian region, of the Caspian Sea, of the Black Sea, and of the possibilities within the Union. With Georgia's further integration into Europe, I think what we will get is we'll get further possibilities to deepen and strengthen our democratic institution, to make our economy more stable. But EU is also getting quite a bit from it, because they are getting a country which is really a gateway to Caspian Sea resources, gateway to some of the most interesting Asian markets, a country which is very open, has a very liberal system of trade and doing business in Georgia, very moderate taxation system, and at the same time the country that is creating historic possibilities of transfer of oil, gas, of creating further infrastructure in railway, highways, which is creating quite a bit of possibilities of affecting a stable trade with our Asian partners. So I think that this issue right now is very beneficial. Caucasian region is getting more integrated into European culture, into European structures, economic or political, and Georgia is not only interested, but is also committed to furthering this process. So I do understand and acknowledge the complications in some waves of widening the EU, or the complications that are linked with the current situation that you have just mentioned. But at the same time, we look at the process much more historically. We are on this track for a while, we will remain there, and we are taking all the steps forward. As I mentioned before, our choice pro-European integration is determined by many factors. First of all, as I mentioned, this is historic, cultural factor, and the need of being part of the family of nations who live with respect of individual freedoms, which develop their nations through democratic institutions, basically being the part of that culture that has been developing on this continent. On the other hand, there was also an economic factor in our choice, because European market, and this has been mentioned several times today, is the biggest market in the world, with 500 million very wealthy members of this market, buyers in this market, with the huge development possibilities, and the market that is actually, that will, I believe, rediscover opportunities in Georgia and in Caucasus region. Because we have mentioned here today several times the energy security issues linked to development of Europe, and I believe that Georgia is creating diversified tracks of energy security, of provision of the commodities, as well as other communication possibilities. So I think that we had a specific argument in not only cultural and political, but also economic argument in being interested into joining the, through association agreement, to join the European zone, and further to declare very clearly that our further target is membership, is a full-fledged membership of the EU eventually. Well, we have not been alone in the process. The process has been developed originally 5 years ago through an Eastern Partnership format, including 6 countries, 3 of which have signed actually the association agreement, and the 3 countries are Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. Now we know the dramatics linked to Ukrainian signature and all issues that have been developed since this issue became very high on political agenda. The advantage or the tragedy of Georgia at the same time is that we have already gone through this. What happened in Ukraine this year, and what was linked actually to the signature of association agreement and Ukraine's European choice, was a story that we have already seen since 6 years ago. It was 2008 when Georgia's territories were occupied. It was actually a very active engagement of our European and Western partners that the occupation has been stopped, but we couldn't further the agenda, and the territories still remain occupied. So if we are talking about being free nations, new free democracies, being punished for their free choice, one of which is association agreement, it's one of the form of the free choices of those nations. I think that we have already, unfortunately, have already paid the price for this free choice in 2008. Actually, if we talk about the EU and the efficiency of EU policy, I think the fact that something that happened in 2008 in Georgia has been repeated after 6 years. And that we see the same case scenario in Crimea, in other parts of Ukraine, is something that we could also find our blame in. Because if we've been efficient during these 6 years, if the Georgian case on occupation be high on all of the international forums and international agendas, including European and our other Western allies, I think that it would not be so easy to play the dramatic case which we observed at the beginning of this year in Ukraine. Well, anyway, we've seen that we have already taken the pain of free choice and the free pro-Western choice some 6 years ago, but still we are trying to play a very constructive role even in that dimension. We are trying to further our trade relations with Russian Federation, though we have no diplomatic relationships with them.
It would make things a bit difficult.
It is a tricky task, believe me, but we are on the way. We'll present a case scenario for that. We are trying to maintain very close economic relationships with the states that are joining Russia's customs union, Russia's initiated customs union. And in this case also we are providing a very interesting case where a country which is a member of the association agreement and the country's signature of DCFTA is trying to maintain a very positive trade dynamics with the countries of, let's say, other alliance. And at the same time, we are trying to show and to send the message that the choice of association agreement, the European choice, is not a choice against anyone. It is not a choice at the expense of anyone. But it's a choice that will bring benefit to all countries and our neighbors engaged. Because, once more, if all Georgian possibilities on trade, transport, on investment be accomplished, if the free trade with Europe be acknowledged by all the countries engaged, I think that they will find a great benefit in this. So to sum it up, we've been moving in that direction. We have already paid stuff in advance, unfortunately. Fortunately, acknowledgement of the fact that this was a very bad case and this has repeated again, and this could be repeated again if not be reacted very actively, is becoming more active in Europe. So we are on that path. That's a historic path. That's a historic choice that we take very firmly. Well, what we have seen recently is slow, as we have discussed, but the right decision that has been basically reached by the European countries and Western countries to acknowledge that what is basically which has been reached in Wales at the NATO summit, to acknowledge that what Russia is doing in Ukraine is unacceptable and should not be tolerated. And we are talking about political acknowledgement of the fact. And it was good that our allies came to this decision, but we can say the problematic part was that it took quite a bit of time to acknowledge the reality. But if we go even further, I think that what we all have to do is to build a very peaceful-oriented, partnership-oriented, but very principled decision to the rhetorics and geopolitical ambitions of Russian Federation. Russian politicians have been talking about the privileged areas of interest, including countries like mine, like Ukraine, the countries that were at some point part of the Soviet Union and which have regained independence for the last 20 years. This kind of rhetorics to your neighbors, I think that this is disturbing the overall environment, not only in the ex-Soviet Union area, but including the environment in Russia. So, instead of dealing from time to time with the problems in Lugansk in Ukraine, or with problems in Crimea, or with problems in Abkhazia in Georgia, or with problems in Tkhinvali in Georgia, and being shocked and overwhelmed from these conflicts, I think what we all have to do is to build a very consistent response to the overall geopolitical strategy of Russia, talking about its closest neighbors. And to state very firmly that this is unacceptable, no matter where it happens. So what we have seen for the last years is that our European colleagues find out that there is a conflict, oh, there is a conflict in this area, or oh, there is a conflict in this area, whereas the whole area has already been described by Russians as an area where they have the right of special interference. Now, I think that this is very disturbing for us as independent countries, and I think that it should be disturbing for our European partners as well, because when we are talking about stability in Europe, stability in the world, the problems that are emerging from time to time, whether it is Syria or whether this is Iraq or whether this is Afghanistan, actually the issues that Georgia has been always a very responsible player. I think that those issues are not decided if we consider ourselves only in the borders of Union and don't feel that things that are happening in our closest neighborhood and the politics that is developing in our closest neighborhood is going to influence us. So I think that the future is to rational politics. The future is to a very principled response to geopolitical ambitions of the countries, going beyond the international law beyond the regular morals of international relations. And whenever we see this kind of rhetorics, we should expect eventually problems there. So I think that things that happened in 2008 in Georgia, things that happened in 2014 in Ukraine, this rang a bell for our European partners, who acknowledged that they should have a very principled position on the stability of the countries, and that this is not only because of principles, but this is because of internal interest of European countries, internal interest and needs that European countries have. Because if we are talking about a country like Georgia, once more, we provide a very interesting possibilities for furthering Eastern-Western partnership. These kind of possibilities shouldn't be undermined by some irrational and spontaneous action. So I hope that still we are going to face in future some more principled standpoint jointly by the Union, jointly by our allies, and a principled standpoint that will eventually lead to rational de-escalation of the existing conflicts. In 2008, there was a different dynamics. I think that even 2008 was reinterpreted now by EU. The fact that 2008, 2014 are the parts of the same scenario, it's something that our European partners understood now. But this time, I don't think that we had any problems through our integration and association agreement with the European Union. It went pretty smoothly. It went without serious tension or confrontation with Russian Federation. Furthermore, we are able to increase our trade simultaneously with Russians and to bring our traditional products back to Russian markets. So in this respect, I mean, I can say we have quite a success. We have much less success on regaining the territories that were occupied, but we have built a positive dynamics with Russia. Now, I think that eventually the process of sanctions will further lead to the political dialogue, because those are not sanctions without political dialogue. Our European partners, our American partners are in very intensive discussions with the Russian leadership how to come out of this situation. And I think that combined policies with a very firm commitment on keeping this issue high on the political agenda. When we are talking about measures of response to this issue, it's not only economic measures and sanctions. It's very importantly keeping this issue high on the political agenda. I'm talking as a representative of a nation who has enjoyed a great support from our European and American partners on stopping the Russian aggression in 2008. We enjoyed the support. The occupation was stopped. Later, we enjoyed the support on non-recognition of these territories, but the issue has disappeared from the top political agenda. The issue has downsladed to the 22nd or 25th news, you know. And as a result of that, you got repetition of the same scenario in Ukraine. What I think is most crucial is not the sanctions only, but being principled on unacceptance of this kind of policy. And having this sentence of unacceptance and position of unacceptance very high on the political agenda of the countries that are engaged in the region, because it's important for each of us.